Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are my 10 best warrior cards. Now, when I say best, I don't necessarily mean the biggest, scariest minions that do the most damage. I just mean the cards that are the most influential in the game, have the biggest impact on warrior decks, and the cards you'll most commonly see make big plays and influence games. So starting off with number 10, my 10th best warrior card might surprise you, but it's actually the Frothing Berserker. This 3-mana minion has a 2/4 in stats at its base level, but it has a pretty interesting effect. Whenever a minion takes damage, gain +1 attack. So that means Frothing Berserkers can very quickly become very scary minions with 10, 20 attack. Usually something like 6 or 7 is pretty easy to accomplish, particularly with warriors since they have so many different whirlwind effects and ways to do damage to lots of minions all at once. Frothing Berserkers can be scary. Now, of course, these won lots of games back with the original Patron warrior decks where they could gain charge and just instantly hit face for 20 plus damage. But even nowadays in pulled back nerfed Patron decks, there's still really good minions to get out on the board that force a response from your opponent. And I think they're generally underrated as just a vanilla 3-drop in a variety of warrior decks. And I think as we expand the warrior class beyond just control and patron, perhaps in future expansions, that Frothing Berserker could just be a staple 3-drop for the class that has a good base body, but also very quickly becomes a threat that your opponent is forced to respond to. So it has been a prominent part of warrior. Maybe not the most common card, but the potential here has earned it a spot on my list. Moving on to the 9th best warrior card, I am taking a look at Shield Block. This 3-mana spell does 2 things that warriors really typically like to do, one of which is gain armor. You get 5 armor with Shield Block, so it's a very defensive card that can buy you time towards the late game against aggro decks. It can build resources for a card like Shield Slam as well. Also just gives you that high health total that lets you survive into fatigue and stretch games out. But it also allows you to draw a card, another thing which is very important to a variety of warrior decks. So in control style decks, of course, you want to draw cards just so you have the right answers and right threats at the right times, and that's something this allows you to do. But Shield Block even showed up in patron style warriors as well, just to help you cycle that hand, refill that hand and cycle through your deck, finding all the different combo pieces that you needed at the right time. So the flexibility here and the raw strength of Shield Block in a variety of decks earns it its spot on the list. Moving on to number 8. The 8th best warrior card for me is the 5-mana spell Brawl. This destroys all minions except one, which is, of course, chosen at random. Brawl is really just a great board reset for warriors, whether they have a minion on board or not. Typically, this will kill a mountain of stuff, at least 3 or 4 minions. Sometimes you can even use it just against a solo Dr. Boom, right, and hope that the Dr. Boom doesn't survive. We've all seen good draws from Brawl and bad ones, but regardless of how poorly the RNG treats you, still, for 5 mana, being able to kill, 3 or 4 or even like 6 minions all at once is such a strong play and so core to late game warriors' success that Brawl is usually almost always a one of in a lot of warrior decks, and sometimes you'll even see 2 included in control style warriors as well. So it's no surprise to see this card on this list. Moving on to the 7th best card for me, it is Whirlwind. This is 1-mana spell, does 1 damage to all minions. That means enemy minions and your own minions. And Whirlwind itself and other Whirlwind style effects, as they're often called in warrior decks, are really fundamental to the style of the class. So many different things in warrior benefit from either taking damage themselves or having other minions take damage. For instance, Armor Smiths are great when your board is taking damage. Of course, Grim Patrons are fantastic when you're doing damage to them. Frothing Berserkers, as we already mentioned. The list just goes on and on, right? So Whirlwind is good for internal synergy with warriors, but it's also really good at dealing with enemy boards full of little minions like Imps or Silverhand Recruits, which are very prominent in the metagame. So it's a defensive spell, it's an offensive spell, it's a utility spell, and it only costs 1 mana. And Warrior has a handful of good 1 mana spells, which we will be getting to on this list. And Whirlwind is just downright awesome and a perfect fit for the class. So that's why it's here. Moving on to the 6th best Warrior card. It's actually another one of those 1 mana spells, but this time it's Shield Slam. This one does 1 damage to a minion for each armor that you have. So as I mentioned, that shield block earlier, get that 5 armor, hero power up to get to 7, and suddenly you have a 1 mana answer to Dr. Boom, the 7/7 part. So Shield Slam is just great for that spot removal. Typically it's not hard to piece together the 5, the 7, 8 armor that you might need to pull off a Shield Slam. And when you can kill something really big and really expensive for only 1 mana, that's a huge swing in the game, because you're only dedicating 1 mana to remove, say, their Molten Giant, or let's say Mountain Giant, which costs them 5, 6, 7 mana, right? So you're getting rid of a giant threat all for only 1 mana, which means you have extra mana to do other stuff with your turn, whether that was to armor up, play another minion. It's a swing turn. It's a tempo gain. It's allowing you to regain the board while dealing with their board simultaneously, which is what makes Shield Slam so darn good. It's not the best 1 mana spell, though. There's one more we'll get to in just a minute. But between then and now, we have one other card, which is the 5th best Warrior card. It is Armorsmith. This 2 mana minion is all about building armor, which we just said is an awfully good thing to have as Warrior. Whenever a friendly minion takes damage, gain 1 armor. So she's only a 1/4, which means she's not going to be killing a lot of stuff on her own. But that's fine, because with Armorsmith, you want her to stay around for a little while. The longer she's alive, the more likely she is to generate extra value. So having the 4 health to work with is much more valuable than if, say, she were a 4/1 or even a 3/2, which is a more typical minion stat allocation at that 2 mana slot. So it's fine that she has 1 attack. That's often even good for trading into early game cards like some Living Root Tree Ants or some Silverhand Recruits and all that nasty stuff. Plus she has 4 health, which means she's harder to kill cleanly for opponents in the early game. So even if you played her on an empty board and didn't use any effects to activate her, she might generate 2 armor for you and kill a few minions. But when you can drop her behind a taunt, usually she's going to generate even more value. And if you use whirlwind effects in conjunction with Armorsmith, there's really no limits to how much armor you can accumulate. I've seen 2 Armorsmiths dropped on a board, a few whirlwind effects on a full board, and suddenly the Warrior had 20 armor when they started with 0 just a few seconds ago. So the potential for Armorsmith as a just ridiculously defensive card that can generate absurd value for only 2 mana means that she's, of course, a staple in control Warrior decks, but also she shows up in like Patron-style Warriors or combo-style Warriors that are using a lot of different whirlwind effects and trying to find value to stay alive long enough to draw into all the different pieces they're looking for in their deck. So Armorsmith has raw power and flexibility, 2 of the most important things in any given card. Moving on to the 4th best Warrior card, it's that other 1 mana spell that I was talking about. This time it is Execute. Destroy a damaged enemy minion. So between Shield Slam and Execute, they're both really good, really efficient removal spells, and in some situations Shield Slam is going to be preferable, in others Execute will be preferable. As far as which one is better, it's kind of a toss-up in many ways, right? But in my mind, Execute's a little bit easier to pull off most of the time, because you're likely going to have minions on board, or a whirlwind effect, or a weapon, or something that can guarantee you're able to activate and execute. Shield Slam can be a little more conditional. Sometimes you just won't be able to scrape together the armor that you need for that removal. So Execute takes the edge there. Also, Execute is just a free card. All you have to do is level up Warrior and you gain access to Execute. Whereas if you'll notice, Shield Slam is actually an epic, so it's quite expensive for new players and really even veteran players to craft this one. So it's a little more restrictive in who can use it. So combine those 2 facts together and Execute definitely takes the edge for me. It's just a super efficient, super strong removal spell that's great for all the same reasons that Shield Slam is fantastic. You can do so many different things, and it works so well with Warrior's Kit, where whirlwind and small damage effects are very common. But it's not one of the best 3 cards. There are 3 more I think are even better. The first of which is the 2-mana weapon, Fiery War Axe. It's a 3/2 weapon, and its nickname, of course, is Fiery Win Axe. And any card that's nicknamed with the word win is a good sign that it's a great card. And they got it right with Fiery War Axe. Typically, if you draw Fiery War Axe on turn 2 or earlier as a warrior, you're going to be in really good shape, because it means you can kill most early game minions that your opponent will play, and you can do it very efficiently, right? You can kill 2 minions with 1 weapon that only costs 2 mana. So you're gaining a card and a mana advantage over your opponent almost immediately, which allows you to keep up in the early game. Sure, you're sacrificing a little bit of your health as a warrior, but health is a great resource as a warrior to use, because you always have that armor to regain that health, so it's not a problem to take some face damage with weapons early. So Fiery War Axe at the right time can help you stay ahead on the board early, which is always a fantastic bonus to have as a warrior, because usually you're used to playing from behind. So even in the late game, it's still a good card, because there's always something that has 3 or less health that has to be knocked off, essentially. Or you can just use it to start hitting the enemy's face at a certain point when you're looking to piece together damage to get like a Grom combo, or just finish them off from minions on board. So that flexibility and utility and the early game dominance that Fiery War Axe can offer definitely make it one of the best warrior cards in the game. But it's not actually even the best weapon. I actually have another weapon at the number 2 spot for warrior. I think this one's better than Fiery War Axe. It's the 4-mana Death's Bite. It's a 4/2, so a little bit higher attack than Fiery War Axe. Admittedly, significantly more expensive at 4 mana versus 2 mana. But it's really the Death Rattle effect that makes Death's Bite so unbelievably good. The Death Rattle is deal 1 damage to all minions. So after you use both charges of your Death's Bite, it's going to break, it'll die, essentially, and trigger that Death Rattle effect, deal 1 damage to all minions. Now, as we've mentioned 10 times in this video so far, whirlwind effects like that one are fantastic in warrior. With Death's Bite, it sets up things like big patron turns, because you can use multiple whirlwinds in a single turn with your Death's Bite, with your whirlwind, second whirlwind, so on and so forth. But it's also great with Grommash Hellscream, who we're going to talk about in just 1 second, because you can set up a 14 damage turn with an active Death's Bite that you're about to hit the enemy's face with. Play Grom on the board, your Death's Bite whirlwind goes off, Grom goes up to 10 attack, you hit them for 14 in a single turn, which is often enough to kill a lot of people, even on an empty board, as long as that Death's Bite is loaded up. Plus, I shouldn't undervalue just the fact that it's a 4-attack weapon over 2 turns, which is fantastic for killing so many different things. When you get this on turn 4, you feel pretty good, because usually it allows you to keep up in the mid-game in combination with trading minions or other whirlwind effects or removal spells. Usually you won't be falling behind in that key mid-game turn 4 to turn 6 range. And it's, of course, great in the late game, too, for just 8 damage and the Grom combo. Death's Bite just does so many darn things well. I'm sad to see it leaving in standard format. So far, we haven't seen a good replacement for Death's Bite, so it's going to definitely change how warrior decks are built and designed, and probably hurt a lot of the current decks as well. This card is just too good to lose. But it's not the best. There's one more. I think you already know who it is. I hit pretty powerfully. It is the 8-mana Grommash Hellscream. Of course, this card is the most hated card to see anytime you're playing warrior, because it usually means they're getting a hyper-efficient trade, you've got a huge minion to deal with, or just that you're dead. And often it means that you're dead. For 8 mana, you're getting a 4/9, which is actually a pretty solid minion, just because it's very difficult to remove, even as a 4/9. People undervalue that part of Grom, I think. Just 9 health is a lot of health. 4 attack is also a pain to deal with. And then, of course, there's also the charge. Being able to attack instantly is a huge deal. Sometimes Grommash will just kill an Azure Drake right there. Just take out the Azure Drake, and then you suddenly have a 10-5 on the board, which is still a nightmare for opponents to deal with, because that enrage effect plus 6 attack is incredibly powerful. Other times, as I mentioned, with a whirlwind effect, Grommash is just 10 attack. He's just hitting your face for 10, which is enough to end games in combination with one or two other spells. He is a little bit susceptible to Big Game Hunter, of course, but usually by the time you're playing Grommash, you don't really care about Big Game Hunter that much, so that's not necessarily a downside. Between the instant impact that Grom has, the high health total, the efficient 8 mana cost, which is significantly better than 9 mana. If Grommash were 9 mana, he'd be much harder to do a couple different things with, like Cruel Taskmaster Grommash, which is a 12 damage combo that's very popular as well. All of that added together just makes him one of the most reliable minions in the game. He shows up in every control late game warrior deck that needs a finisher other than fatigue. His just consistency, his constant threat, the fact that people knowingly have to play around him throughout an entire game, even if he's not in your deck or in your hand, people still presume he is. He's just that popular and that pervasive in the meta that he's an influence even when you don't have the card. All of that added together makes, to me, Grommash Hellscream the best warrior card in Hearthstone. So that's it for my list. I'm sure you have some thoughts of your own. You might agree or disagree with some of my choices, particularly the ordering. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment with what you think the best warrior cards in Hearthstone are. I would appreciate all that discussion. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.